But I want to continue with my discussion of President Obama's radio address, in which he is focusing on Father's Day and how the U.S. government is going to make situations better for moms and dads and families in general, right, by passing new rules and new regulations. So here is the first cut of this radio address. It's cut number 12.
Still, as a country, there are ways we can help support dads and moms who make that choice. That's why earlier this week, we brought working dads from across America to the White House to talk about the challenges they face. And in a few weeks, I'll hold the first ever White House Working Families Summit. We've still got too many workplace policies that belong in the 1950s, and it's time to bring them up to date for today's families, where oftentimes both parents are working.
Yes, both parents are working. Why? Because they have to. See, back in the 50s, they weren't, because they didn't have to, right? And why do both parents have to work now, whereas in the 1950s, they didn't have to work? And that's because we didn't have all this government, or we hadn't had all this government in the past. So we had a strong, healthy economy where men can earn a good living, and they didn't have the government confiscating what they earned through taxes. It's because the government taxed the hell out of dad that mom had to get a job. And it's because the government debased the value of the money that dad was earning. Because there was so much inflation where wages didn't keep pace with prices, mom had to work. So it's the government's fault that it now takes two salaries, two incomes to support a household. And now they want to have a summit, a White House summit on families, on working families. Again, that reminds me of the situation, where the guy murders his parents, and then while he's on trial or after he's convicted, he asks the jury for mercy because he's an orphan, right? I mean, this is basically what Obama's saying. The government is responsible for these problems, and a government summit on families isn't going to do anything to help. More government means a bigger burden on families. That means families are going to have to work even harder. One day in the future, it might not just be mom and dad that are in the workforce. It might be the kids, too. They might have to leave school and get jobs to help feed the family. The free market is what ended child labor. It wasn't some government law. But if we have enough government, it's going to bring back child labor, because it's going to take the labor of children to help support the government. Because, see, the women have already joined the workforce. The free market liberated them from the drudgery of work. They were able to stay at home and raise their kids and help and make dad have a better life. But now they have to work. The next thing you know, our kids are going to have to work too. And what are they going to say? It's kids lib. This is great now that kids don't have to go to school when they're young and hang out on the playground, that they can go to work just like mom and dad, that they're liberated or something like that. But it's always the government claims credit for the victories of capitalism and then undermines those victories and says, aha, you see, this means we need more government. Here's a little more sound from the president, cut number 13.
Moms and dads deserve affordable child care and time off to care for a sick parent or child without running into hardship. Women deserve equal pay for equal work. And at a time when more women are breadwinners for a family, that benefits men too. And because no parent who works full-time should have to raise a family in poverty, it's time for Congress to follow the lead of state after state, get on the bandwagon, and give America a raise.
First of all, equal pay for equal work, what does that have to do with it? And, even if women were being paid less than men, even if that were true, and if you can mandate that, the only way that it would work is if you reduce the pay of men, because the businesses don't have an unlimited amount of money. So if they're being forced to overpay women, they'd have to underpay men to compensate for it. Of course, the other way they could do it is hire fewer women. So if you enforce these laws and you force businesses to overpay women and they don't hire them, how does that help dad? Or if you have to cut dad's pay in order to raise mom's pay, how does that help dad? The government has so destroyed the incomes of men that it's really, made marriage. Marriage is something now that fewer and fewer people are contemplating because it doesn't make economic sense anymore. It used to make economic sense because if you were a young woman, you could get married and then you'd have a husband who could support you. So if you were 21, 22, 23-year-old gal, you'd get married. Maybe the guy was 25, 26, 27. That was it. He could support you. In fact, he could even buy a house for you. That's it. And you could stay at home and raise the kids, no problem. But now, who are you going to marry if you're a 21, 22-year-old woman? What 25, 26-year-old guy can support you? He can't even support himself. He's still living with his parents. He's drowning under student loans. What's the point of getting married? You're going to have to work just as hard if you're single. If you're married as if you're single. And from the men's perspective, the men used to say, look, I'm going to get married because I'm going to have a wife at home. She's going to take care of the house. She's going to make my life better. She's going to grocery shop. She's going to cook for me. She's going to give me a great family life, and I'm going to be able to go out and succeed. No, you get married today, the woman's got to work just as hard as you. She's not at home taking care of the house. She's out working just like you. She might have student loans just like you. So, now that no wonder people aren't getting married. Of course, you can't afford to have kids anyway. Kids are so expensive if you have to pay for them yourself. If you're on welfare, sure, you can have all the kids you want. But if you're actually working, you can't afford kids. And if you can't afford kids, why get married? The main reason that people get married is to have a family. Well, if the government has made it so expensive to have a family that you can't, then what's the point? And of course, so there's so many ways that the government has just undermined the family, undermined marriage, and he's up there talking about how we need the government, and we need the government like a hole in the head. Meanwhile, he sticks in a plug for the minimum wage. What does the minimum wage have to do with dads? Why should a dad be working for the minimum wage? First of all, if you're a man and you have children and all you're earning is the minimum wage, you ought to be ashamed. You don't have children when you're working a minimum wage job. You wait until you can afford kids, and then you have them, right? You afford it first, and then you have the kids. See, if you're 18, 19, 20-year-old guy, and you are a fry cook at McDonald's, you don't have kids. Why? Because you can't afford them, right? You wait until you're the manager of that McDonald's, maybe. Or maybe you wait until you own the franchise, and then you have kids. That's the way it works. You don't decide to have kids on a minimum wage and then demand that your employer pay you more so you could support the kids that you never should have had because you can't afford them. You need to be an adult, right? You need to be able to afford. That's, in fact, men, they didn't even get married until they could afford a wife. But, they used to be able to afford a wife. It wasn't that hard by the time you were 25, 26 to be able to afford a wife. And it wasn't that hard to afford kids. Now it's almost impossible. For young people, they got to be in their 30s or 40s before they can afford kids. But your dad is not working for minimum wage. It's your kid that's working for minimum wage, or he's not working because the minimum wage is so high that he can't get a job. Here is the next cut, number 14.
Dads work hard, so our country should do what we can to make sure their hard work pays off, to make sure life for them and their families is a little less stressful, a little more secure, so they can be the dads their kids need them to be. Because there's nothing more precious in life than the time we spend with our children. There's no better feeling than knowing that we can be there for them and provide for them and help give them every shot at success. Let's make sure every dad who works hard and takes responsibility has the chance to know that feeling. Not just on one Sunday, but every day of the year.
Hey, I actually agree with the president. I agree with what he just said. Maybe this is the first that I agree with the president, but I disagree on how to achieve that. You know how we can ease the burden on dad? How about get rid of the income tax? How about let dad keep what he earns? Wouldn't that do a lot? How about not forcing dad to file his tax returns every April 15th? How about letting him off the hook there? How about letting him off the hook for these Social Security taxes, these payroll taxes, so he can actually save for his retirement? How about getting the government out of education, getting the government out of student loans so that college tuition prices can come down and dad doesn't have to spend so much money helping his kids go to college? Right? Or how about also getting rid of all these rules and regulations, getting rid of the income tax so that the labor productivity can go up, so that real wages can go up, so that mom doesn't have to work if she doesn't have to? Wouldn't that help Dad out if when he came home from a hard day, he didn't have to help with the dishes and help with the housework? Wouldn't it be nice if he came home and the meal was ready for him the way it used to be? Or if he can actually afford a housekeeper, if we got rid of all these rules and regulations so that mom didn't have to do the dishes either, so that mom had a housekeeper, so she could spend quality time with her children or getting involved in the community, in the schools, so maybe the schools would be better. I mean, there are so many things that we can do to help out Dad, to help out mom, to help out everybody. But they all involve less government. They all involve dismantling all the things that have made life so difficult for the moms and dads and the kids. The thing about kids, I just read that the infant mortality rate in Washington, in Detroit, is higher than it is in China, in Mexico, and in Thailand. So if you're a baby and you're being born in China, your odds of living to year one are greater in China than they are in Detroit. That's what government does to families. And of course, unfortunately, the president hasn't learned this yet. So what he's about to do, if he gets his way, is make life even more difficult for dads, moms, families in general. Hey, we got one more break, one final segment coming up. We will be right back.